Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I am Scott Mathias from NCEA, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A or chat windows. We will be monitoring the questions and will try to answer them all in the allotted time. Within 24 hours of today's webinar, I will email everyone a link to the recording, as well as an online survey. Once you fill out the survey, a certificate of completion for the webinar will be emailed to you. Today's webinar, Using Choral Repertoire to Train Your Choristers, is being led by Dr. Lucas Tappan. Before I turn it over to our presenter, let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Creator God, you hear us, our words in prayer, our silent thoughts and pleas, and each note or melody we sing and play. May our praises today connect with heaven and unite our hearts with the sound of eternity. Lord, may the gifts of our voices and melodies of our instruments move with the work of your Holy Spirit. May we bring light into dark places, restore hope and vision to all who are oppressed, and well-being and health to all those who suffer. Today, Lord, we give you our worship. May it be a platform for you to teach our lives afresh and build your church. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lucas, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Before I get started, I just wanted to thank the American Federation of Puri Cantores for having me here, Kathleen Prina, and then also Scott for leading this, and the National Catholic Education Association that partners with them. Just a few words about Puri Cantores. Puri Cantores is actually an international choral organization for young people, and especially in the United States, we have the American Federation of Puri Cantores, and it really offers a way for young people to partner with a larger organization to expand their knowledge of the faith, music, and especially to join with other young people around the United States and even sometimes around the world in order to perhaps perform works that they wouldn't get to perform in their own parishes. Maybe they're not large enough, or whatever the case may be, but it really gives students a way to connect with their faith through music, and not just using the music that was composed now, but using the music that's been composed 1,500 years ago, beginning with very early chant, all the way up through things that might still be being composed while they're signing up for their next choral festival. And so these choral festivals and things, it's a way for young people to interact, to be able to gather with other groups. And then Puri Cantores brings in usually some nationally recognized musician to lead these, and students get to learn from these great musicians. So I would really encourage both young people and also choir programs to think about joining this. And even for those who direct the choirs, there are things like these webinars and newsletters that can really help you with things that you might just not know how to answer, or maybe you don't know who to ask. So anyway, I would really encourage you to join the American Federation of Puri Cantores. And again, thank you. And then thanks to all of those who are tuned in this time. I know for me, where I am, school just let out, and it's kind of a busy time. And so taking time out of your day like this, I really appreciate it as a presenter, you giving me your time. So without much ado, I'll dive into what I'm going to be speaking about today. So when Kathleen first got hold of me, she wanted to know if maybe I would talk a little bit about using choral repertoire to train our choristers, but specifically with training and teaching sight singing. I think that's something that a lot of us as choir directors probably struggle with, is getting our students to be able to read music at sight, as opposed to having to plunk out every melody on the piano over and over and over until the last chorister gets it. And that can be very frustrating as a choir director. So how could we use our choral repertoire to change our choristers? And I think if I could sum up the entire talk with one tagline, it would be begin with the end in mind. And why I say that is because about 10 years ago, after I'm in my current position here, I've been here about 15 years, and we had started a children's choir program. And we were sort of clutching at straws in the dark. I mean, I read different things, I knew certain people, and I was asking questions. But about 10 years ago, I was in New York City at St. Thomas Fifth Avenue for one of their choir master conferences. And St. Thomas is the premier Anglican men and boys choir in the United States, and they're internationally recognized. And I thought, I would like to go there and learn something from them. And I believe Barry Rose, who used to be at St. Paul's in London, was the presenter. And anyway, while I was there, I was learning a lot of good stuff, the little tidbits that you can take back to your choir. And but at one point, someone had mentioned that in the year previous, a talk had been given about everything their young students needed to know musically and also theologically and liturgically before they could become choristers in their choir. And the man who gave that presentation happened to be there. So I asked him if I could get a copy of his presentation from the previous year. And in there, especially in the musical section, it went through everything that a new chorister, a probationer, needed to learn in order to become a full-fledged member of the choir. The notes that he needed to know, the staff, all of the nomenclature that deals with music, everything that their choristers at that spot needed to know. And then they had a list of music that their young choristers would learn as they're learning all of their music theory. And what I realized was that what they did was look at what music do our choristers need to sing within the liturgy. And from there, they simply worked backwards. All right, our choristers sing in terms of modern music. And when I say modern, I just mean modern as in written on 5 lines. So, the late medieval, early Renaissance up to now. The choristers and the music they encounter, they're going to encounter everything from the breve to the 16th note. Okay, now I know what notes I need to teach. I don't have to teach 32nd and 64th notes. Maybe if something like that happens within the context of a piece, we'll point it out, but there's really no sense in teaching that right now because it's not going to benefit us in what we're trying to do. And then along with that, especially, first of all, the choristers, they need to learn, obviously, the treble staff. But on the staff, how many ledger lines down, how many ledger lines up? I just began getting a picture that this is the music that choristers need to sing. And so all we have to do is from that music, decide what is it that our students need to know in order to sight read that music. And we just back it up little by little. And then we have a ready-made process for taking children from point A to point Z, whatever that might be. So that really opened my eyes in terms of how I could go about creating a training scheme using the repertoire that we use as a parish. So at our parish where we are, it is a Novus Ordo parish. The Mass is very reverently and beautifully celebrated. Our church was built in the early 60s, but it's very much on a traditional plan. And so within the Mass, even though the Mass is in English, we do use both English and Latin Mass ordinaries. We sing the Gregorian introit and communion antiphon. There's psalmody, English and Latin motets, and then obviously English hymnody. So those are the things that I and my parish need to be looking at in order to teach choristers. The other thing is, in our area, there is a very, very large contingent of people who attend the traditional Latin Mass. And so, we have a number of choristers in our choral program who actually attend Mass at the Latin Mass, but they come in and they will sing for Mass in our parish, but their parents want them to be part of the chorister program. So because of that overlap, we also go out to their parish that's run by the Fraternity of St. Peter. We go out at least once a year to sing a big Mass for them. And then every so often they'll contact us for weddings and funerals. So I also have to be mindful that even though we don't chant the creed on a regular basis at our Mass, singing it in Latin, our choristers still do need to learn that. So I always keep that in the back of my mind. So that's what our parish looks like. That's what our liturgy looks like. And so with that, that's going to determine what all of my choristers need to know. Now, also a little more background information. So when children enter our chorister program, we have about 70 children who are in it, and our parish, I think, has somewhere around 1,650 families, maybe. And so with those 70 choristers that we have, when they first enter, we call them probationers, and they can enter at the age about 9, third grade. I at least want them to have made their first Holy Communion, and then it's really necessary that they can read rather well, because learning to read music is much like learning to read the words on a page. So those are a couple of things that students need to have done before they enter the choir. But then that first year that they're with us, we call them a probationer, because they're on probation to get into the choir. And then once they pass through that probationary year, we call them a junior chorister. And those are the ones who have the rudiments of sight singing, but it's still very fresh, and they need a lot of work taking that knowledge that they have so that they can be able to apply it to the music at hand. And then from there, there's not a set time, but if they have the desire and the skill level, usually after a few years, then they can become what we call a senior chorister. Now, as a probationer, there's not a lot that they get to sing within the sacred liturgy. If it's a hymn that they really know, a simple chant, perhaps a Kyrie, or a hymn that's really well known, like Hail Holy Queen or something like that, usually they wouldn't be joining in yet. Now, the junior choristers, they get to sing all of the congregational music. So I know that by the time that they become a junior chorister, they need to be able to take anything that the congregation sings and know, how do I learn this? How do I figure this out on my own without having the piano played? And then the senior choristers, they are the ones who take on, for example, Mass propers and the Gregorian propers, the psalmody, some polyphonic ordinary settings, motets, hymn descants, hymn harmonizations, things like that. So that's what our choristers need to know. So that's the next thing I did after I determined what is it that we sing as a parish. That's the first thing. Then I break it down. What is each group of children? What do they need to know? And then from there, I set up what I need to teach them. So for the probationers, the new singers, obviously we want to teach them proper breathing and good vocal habits. So many of them come in thinking that, the best way to sing is to sing, like the pop singer or whatever. And, I guess that has its place somewhere, but not in church. So to take what they have, we teach them good breathing, good vocal habits. Then we also need to teach them basic sight reading. So everything, a whole note to an eighth note. We tend to not do too much with dotted rhythms. Those are just very difficult to get. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So if these are the things that we need to teach them, we need to get them ready for some basic hymns and simple chants. All right. Now, because we are, sorry, here, I'm trying to do something here on the page. All right. Because we're trying to teach healthy and expressive vocal technique, it's really good to have some of those hymns that they already know so well. We use those in teaching good vocal habits. How are we going to sing this? How do we breathe? Where do we breathe in this song? Especially the head voice, and getting into that head voice, the higher up it goes, and having a smooth transition between the two registers. So we use a lot of the repertoire that they already know just from attending Mass for that. And then if they're going to begin to sight read, we need to teach them solfege. Now, at this point, we pretty much stick with major or solfege in the major key. We don't get to the minor yet. And I hear some people in America, we tend to be very much, we really like using solfege. I find in England, from what I've read and I get the sense of, they don't use solfege so much. They feel that it's kind of an extra step that gets in the way, sort of like when you're learning a new language, you have to forget about the English words. You just have to dive into the German word or whatever your language you're learning. And they feel that solfege is kind of just another added step in the middle. What I use it for, if a student can sight read and doesn't know solfege, well, then okay, they've done what I need to do. But what I find is that when students come, most of our students have not really done any kind of singing other than singing with, the radio or something like that, or, whatever they listen to. And what I need to teach them is for example, if we're going to sing in the major scale, the first thing I have to do in their ears is to really establish the tonal center of do, so that no matter where we are in a song, I could stop it and say, sing do for me. And to do that, we have to start with solfege, singing up and down the scale. First in stepwise motion, then beginning to add skips. And if we're talking about using our repertoire to teach, one thing we use with known hymns is we begin to, we use those hymns and mass parts to help establish in the ear that sense of do, or what it might be for different intervals within solfege. So for example, let's use the hymn, Jesus Christ is Risen Today. If we're trying to begin to teach skips, let's say they've gotten pretty adept at singing the solfege scale up and down, back and forward in stepwise motion, but now we want to introduce skips. Jesus Christ is Risen Today begins do, mi, so, do. So what I can do is they already know that hymn in their mind. So in a sense, they already know the concept of it, but they just haven't heard it yet, or they haven't had it presented yet to them. So what I do is I present the concept of skips, do, mi, so, to the probationers. And then I say, you actually already know this. And I link it back to something that they know, and they make that connection. Ah, yes, that's what do, mi, so sounds like. And then from then on, whenever we encounter do, mi, so in a song, it should be very simple, but if they don't get it, I can remind them, what's that hymn or that song that we use to help us remember do, mi, so? And so I'm just using that to develop their ear. In terms of some other things we do, the treble staff and note names and the nomenclature, this is the treble clef. This is called a staff. It has 5 lines, 4 spaces. These are the letter names of the lines. These are the letter names of the spaces. We will teach that it's very simple to do with a whiteboard and a black marker, and especially younger children really love being able to memorize all of those things. And we also present simple meters, 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4. We do a lot of clapping of note values and rhythms. And for the probationers, it would be everything from a whole note to an eighth note, as I said earlier. And they need to be able to identify that that's a quarter note, that's a half note, that's an eighth note, and this is how we clap it. Now, again, using our repertoire to train, let's take that hymn, Jesus Christ is Risen Today. We start off 4 quarter notes. Jesus Christ is. So what we will do, we will take that hymn and first write it in big letters up on a board, up on the whiteboard. And, the first thing, we wouldn't worry about rhythm. We would just worry about getting the tune in our heads. And as they start to name notes, I'll give them do on C. So they'll sing do, and then they'll sing mi and so, and back down to do. And by this time, it dawns on them, oh, this is Jesus Christ is Risen Today. So now we're learning the solfege and the pitches, but it's also somewhat in their memory. That way it sort of bridges the gap between we're learning something new, but yet we want to have something familiar as well. And then after we've got the tune, then we go back and we start identifying, okay, this is a quarter note, this is a half note, this is an eighth note. How do we clap our quarter notes? How do we clap our half notes? How do we clap our eighth notes? And little by little, over and over and over, repetition is the mother of all studies, they begin to internalize what they know in a way intellectually, and that's what we're going for. And then we'll also work with some simple dynamics and tempo markings. Now, before I go forward, I just want to insert something that actually one of my family members I was talking to before I gave this, and my son is one of my choristers, and he said something that made me think, you know what, maybe I should touch upon this. So this is why I don't have a slide for it. It just came up, but I want to just briefly touch on, I guess we could call it the psychology of sight singing and how sight singing is going to work. How does it mentally work to take a child from not being able to sight read to being able to sight read? And the best way I can say it is my wife homeschools our children, and she uses a book to teach reading called 100 Easy Lessons to Teach Reading, I think is the name of it. And in there, every so often I will give one of the reading lessons to our children. And what I've noticed is it literally begins with one little concept and just keeps building on that. And, it's sort of like spiral learning. You learn a little bit, you practice it. You learn a little bit more and you practice that. But in order for that to happen, the student has to already have an idea of forming a sound. For example, I remember one of the first sounds that is taught in this sight reading or in this reading is the letter M. So they have to be able to make sound. But with those first few sounds, they've already heard them for years before they start reading. Then you little by little begin to teach reading. So if we think about that musically, before a student comes to me, ideally they would have been singing children's songs, folk songs, and everything like that. Now that's not really done today. So sometimes we have to provide that for our choristers in class, even though we're not going to be singing these songs at Mass. Sometimes, especially in our summer camps, we do teach folk singing, just so students can begin to know, what does it feel like to sing? What does the major scale even sound like? Not that they can identify it, but they've at least sung in the major scale. And something else that sort of opened my eyes, there's a group of families close by who homeschool, and they asked if I would teach Gregorian chant to their children. And when I showed up, there were maybe about 40 children who were there, and the moms had brought all of these kids. So we had everyone from babies up to kids who were in high school. And the first thing I did, I started teaching folk songs, especially to the younger ones, because I bet half of the kids at that point couldn't match pitch. Well, now, a couple of years into this, some of those children who started as infants and now are 3 years old, they can actually sing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do up and down the scale. And just because they've been singing these folk songs. And the other thing is, usually by the time they get to 3 or 4, we have no pitch problems with them. There's just so much that they learn by having the language of music before they come to learn how to read and write it, in a sense. The same way, if you're learning to read English, hopefully you would have spoken it for many years, just like babies and toddlers, they hear English before they begin to speak the language. The same thing musically, students should hear that. And if they don't have that, it's going to make our job of teaching sight singing much more difficult. So you might think about that in your chorister program, if it's possible to have a kinder music of some kind, or sort of a pre-chorister course where children just come in and sing folk songs and have fun doing that. So that's sort of the first step of learning how to read, is you actually have to have the language inside of you first. So we need that musical language, and we get that through a lot of times folk singing. Then the second thing, when you teach a language, and it's like learning how to read, there's a great way of teaching music. It's called the Kadai method. And they have 3 principles when they're teaching sight singing, because it's a program basically teaching music through singing. And they talk about preparing, presenting, and reinforcing. So when you are teaching sight singing, again, you first want to prepare students. And that's what we're doing with the probationers. We've prepared them because they already know the hymn, Jesus Christ is risen today. Then we present something. So we present, this is do, mi, so. Can you sing these skips, do, mi, so? Now, once they know that those 3 notes are do, mi, so, now we want to reinforce that by finding that in other songs and singing it. Really in any way, shape, or form, trying to make that, pointing that out as many times going forward as we can to reinforce that. And you just do that little by little with all of the musical concepts. So probationer music, what does that mean? What kind of music do we work with them? For example, the preface dialogue, the Lord be with you and with your spirit. That's something that they hear in Mass quite often. So we can take that and teach good vocal habits through that. The psalm refrains and Alleluia, same thing. Hymns, Jesus Christ is risen today. Then if we're looking at new music for the probationers, it has to be something very simple. For example, if we go down to what I've listed as the new hymn tune, the chant of the Father's love begotten, Divinum Mysterium, I think it is in the Latin. We will use that in modern notation because it starts, of the Father's love begotten, do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do. It's all stepwise motion. So if we write that up on the whiteboard and we start by giving them do, usually they can figure out do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do. It's not going to be perfect in the beginning, but it's just a step. You keep reinforcing these things. And there are some simple motets. For example, Hal Hobson's arrangement of Bach's All the Earth Sing Forth. That song is mostly half notes, quarter notes, a few eighth notes, and the occasional whole note. Rhythmically, it's very simple. The outer sections are in the major key. The middle section, I believe, is in the minor key. And some things that it's very easy, I will admit, we usually teach the outer sections using solfege, the minor section, because we haven't gotten to that. I will teach that to them by rote, but that's something we do with them. If we skip forward to the junior choristers and what skills they need and how we use repertoire to teach them, obviously we keep going with healthy and expressive vocal technique. At this point, we begin adding the minor solfege, and the way we do it, we actually keep do as do. We don't use la for the do or for the main note in minor. And the reason we do that is because if we're trying to establish what do sounds like, and all of a sudden we start using la as do, well, then now we have to reestablish that as the tonal center. And even though it's easy in the sense that you can connect the major and the relative minor, what I find is that if you skip to singing something in the minor key and you use la as do, they don't hear la as do. They hear do as do. And I hope I'm not getting too technical here, but that is why for the minor keys, we will, instead of singing la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, we would actually sing do, re, mi, fa, sol, le, te, do. And they learn it just as quickly as the other way, but yet it still allows, when they say do, when they sing do, they're actually hearing what they know is do. We continue with, we just teach them, or I just teach them treble clef right now. In the great choir schools, they would be teaching bass clef as well, and they'd be taking piano lessons. I don't have that luxury currently. We've talked about that, but right now that's not where we are. So I don't worry about teaching bass clef at this point. We would like to do some classroom piano, but like I said, not right now. Now, as junior choristers, we do need to start looking at compound meters along with simple. We also need to start looking at the breve and 16th notes, because as we begin to bring the junior choristers into senior choristers, we need to train them as well with that. And then continuing with dynamics, tempo, and all of those things. And don't worry, at the end of this, I'm actually going to bring up a musical example and go through how I would take it from a probationer all the way to a senior chorister. So the juniors, we continue with healthy vocal technique. We continue to establish tonal centers, especially so along with do, and then T is the leading tone, so that when they're jumping around in music, they can really hear those. New music. So at this point, we really start introducing a lot more chant to them. Most of the time, it's going to be in modern notation, though. For example, the Kyrie for Mass 11, or the Crux Fidelis that we'll be singing on Good Friday. There are some Mass ordinaries. For example, last year at Epiphany is when we sang our Mass for the Latin Mass community, and we sang Big's Missa Puer Natus Es, which is obviously based on the chant Puer Natus Es. But this is a three-part Mass setting in modern notation, and so it's easy enough that our junior choristers, we took sections of it, primarily the Kyrie and the Agnus Dei, and they had to learn all of that by sight. Now, it takes longer in the beginning to teach things by sight. That's why they couldn't learn the Gloria, the Sanctus, and all of those things. But that's kind of the level of music that they would be learning. Any hymns that we sing, especially new hymns, they have to be able to tackle all of those by sight singing. And the level of motets that our juniors might be looking at, for example, Gibbon's Drop, Drop, Slow Tears, or the Ave Verum Corpus by Byrd. And obviously, they would just be singing the soprano line only in these. So now I want to go to senior choristers. Again, we continue with the vocal technique. Solfege, at this point, we're starting to teach, even in the minor key, you have your harmonic minor, the melodic minor. We use those in warm-ups a lot so that they're continually having to refresh in their memories what it's like to sing each of those. Everything for the treble clef still, unless boys whose voices have changed, then we start teaching them the bass clef. Everything from the breve to the 16th note, by this point, they need to be able to clap on their own without help. One big thing that we start singing with our senior choristers is Gregorian chant, on the four line, the square note notation. And what I find that by this point, because they're so good at using solfege, it's really not difficult to go to Gregorian chant and start singing it. You only have two clefs, your do clef, your fa clef. And once you tell them how to identify those, it's pretty much just letting them know we read the music left to right, top to bottom. Okay, there are a few exceptions here, what these exceptions are. There are a couple of neumes that we need to point out, what does this neume mean? How many notes are actually here? But once we do that, it's really not difficult for them to sing Gregorian chant, even from the graduale. And then I put down here, choristers need to be singing multiple services per week. The reason I say that is I was having a conversation with Sarah McDonald, who is she's head of the girls' choir at Ely Cathedral in England, and she also is at Selwyn College, I believe. And it was just an email conversation that we were having, and I was asking, how do we get our choristers to be able to sight read, to the level that some of these English cathedral choirs are? And one thing she said was, after they learn the basics of sight reading, they then need to, the more they put it into practice, the better they're going to get. And she said that in her estimation, to really become fantastic at sight reading, choristers would need to be singing at least 3 services every week. Now, that's more than what most of us are doing. So in reality, we're probably teaching some of our music by rote and also trying to teach sight reading little by little for them. But that's why with our choir, hopefully starting next year, we were going to do it this spring, but some things came up. The boys practice twice a week and the girls practice twice a week, and then they switch off singing Sundays. So that means that every week our choristers, if we finished our choir rehearsal with Vespers, that would mean they would be singing either 2 or 3 services every week just to help with sight reading. So then senior choristers, what kind of music are they going to be singing? You know, I've got it up here. Obviously the Mass Ordinaries, introits, communios, hymns, psalms. We do a lot of 4-part hymnody, descants, things like that. Motets, things in Latin like the Ego Sum Panis by Palestrina, English motets like Turn Back, O Man by Gustav Holst. That was something they had done at Mass a couple of weeks ago. And then we have special things, you know, for All Souls, teaching Fauré's Requiem Mass, and again, trying to do as much of that by sight reading as possible once the senior choristers have the skills necessary. So with that, I want to, let me click out of this that I'm in right now. Scott, I'm having, okay, sorry, I just got out of there. Now let me pull up this here. This is a gospel acclamation from the Owen Alstott Respond and Acclaim. Can you see this, by the way? I hope. You know what? I don't think, Scott, am I showing? No. Okay.
Yeah, we're not saying a musical excerpt.
Okay. I think, now are you?
There it is.
Okay. So we don't sing this particular gospel acclamation during Lent, but I wanted to show it to you because it's something that if we did, our probationers, junior choristers, and senior choristers would all take part in singing this. And I want to kind of show you how we would do that. So let's start off with probationers. Let's say we have probationers and they have learned solfege. They can sing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do up and down the octave. They also have learned at this point just whole notes, half notes, and quarter notes. And they know how to count those. We haven't necessarily even gotten into time signatures yet or key signatures. What we would do for the probationers is on our whiteboard, we have 5 black lines, which can be made very easily with auto detailing tape, I found out. But we have those 5 lines, and we would write just the soprano line, which I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but we would take just the soprano line of the acclamation, what the congregation would be singing, and write it up on the board. Now, because we don't necessarily even know the names of notes yet, but we do know how to sing the solfege, we would let them know that the very first note is do, and then we would go to the second note. Is that note the same or different? It's the same. So we have another do. Can you sing do? All right. Can we sing it for 1 beat? Do. Now we have to sing 2 do's in a row. Can we do that, children? Do, do, off. Okay. Now the next note. Do we go up, down, or stay the same? We go up 1. Okay. What's 1 up from do? Re. Well, now I forgot what I was singing in do. But anyway, we would point out that this is re, and the next note is also re. So let's start again. We would just sing those 4 notes. 2, ready, go. Do, do, re, re. And then our next note. Do we go up, down, or stay the same? Their hands go up. We go up. We go up 1. What is 1 up from re? It's mi. So let's sing. Well, and then how many me's do we have in a row? We have 3 me's in a row. Let's sing what we know so far. 2, ready, go. Do, do, re, re, mi, mi, mi. And at that point, they usually hold on to me because that's as far as we've gotten. And so we raise, we ask, now that's not a quarter note. What kind of a note is the note above the word Christ? It's a half note. How many beats do we hold a half note? 2. Okay, so let's sing just that much again, and we're only going to hold Christ for 2 notes. So we start off 1, 2, ready, go. Do, do, re, re, mi, 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 off. Okay, then the next note after that, do we go up, down, stay the same? We go down 1. What's 1 down from me? It's re. And it's just continually asking questions to draw this out. This might be the only thing that we teach in choir that day, but we're going to teach it thoroughly. So now we have 2 re's in a row, both of which are quarter notes, 1 beat. So let's sing up to that much. 1, 2, ready, go. Do, do, re, re, mi, 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 re, re. We've gotten up to that point. And then our next note, do we go up, down, or stay the same? We go up 1 to mi. Then the next note, we go down 1 to re again. And then the second to last note, we go down again. So now we're back at do. And then our last note is also the same on do. And those last 2 are half notes. So we will practice that with the choristers. And I wouldn't actually sing along with them, because part of this is they need to make mistakes. So they're constantly seeing, finding out for themselves, what is it that we're trying to do? So at this point, it's going to take a number of tries to get here, but 1, 2, ready, and do, do, re, re, mi, 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 re, re, mi, re, do, do, off. Okay. So really, we're only using 3 notes of the solfege scale, and we can very easily teach that. And then after that, we would go through the words. How do we say words when we're speaking to each other, but how do we need to pronounce them when we're in choir? We go through that. So that is how a probationer would end up singing this piece of music at Mass on Sunday, having learned it completely by sight reading it. Now, if by the time we get to our junior choristers, they have learned, just 1 at a time, we present to them, all right, 1 sharp is G major, 1 flat is F major, and we present up to 5 sharps and 5 flats. So I would start with the junior choristers and say, what key are we in? We're in G major. And also with this, I would just have the melody line on the board. I would not have all music here, because not having seen this much music, it just overloads the junior choristers, because what's this descant at the top? All these verses, what's going on here? So they too just have the melody line, but they have it with the treble clef, they have the sharp, so they have to tell me it's in G major. All right, what is do in G major? It's G. What is our first note? In solfege, it's do. They have to figure, we just keep asking questions so they figure this out. What's the time signature? So they would learn it that way. It's just adding more onto it. And then by the time we have the senior choristers, we have students who can sing soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, although we work with tenors and basses separately. But for the sopranos, it's the same way, learning that melody line. For the altos, you don't start on do, you start on what note, and they count down and they figure out, I'm starting on D, so that's going to be so in solfege. They sing through their line in solfege, then they add in words, and we put the 2 together. And then the senior choristers obviously would then need to go some of the sopranos in the senior choristers would need to take the descant. So the senior choristers would have this 4-part, really 5-part music in front of them, and need to figure everything that they're singing out from the skills that we've taught them. Now, I know it's about 3:45 my time. We're getting close to questions. Now, that's just a very basic, simple overview of how do we teach sight reading. I hope that's been helpful. The last thing before I take questions that I want to do, I'm going to come back to my PowerPoint here, and a couple of things that you might find helpful. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of John Berthelot. He's still living, he's in his 90s. He's an English choir master who wrote a lot about training choirs and specifically teaching sight reading. And I would really direct as many of you as can to two of his books, especially Immediately Practical Tips for Choral Directors and then The 5 Wheels to Successful Sight Singing. Now, being English, they don't bring the solfege into it. I have my reasons for believing why they don't. But if you want to get more in depth, those books really help. And then, if you want to have some sight reading exercises that are all graded from simple to very difficult, Carol Kruger, who's actually from university here in Kansas, has written a book, Progressive Sight Reading, or Progressive Sight Singing, that Oxford University Press publishes. And you might take a look at that book. So with that, Scott, perhaps we could open it up to questions.
Yes, we do have some questions. The first one is, do you use movable dough?
Yes, we do use movable dough. Again, it's the idea that no matter what key we're in, there is always going to be a note that sounds like it's just the home note of the chord. And I personally feel it's easier if we always call whatever that note is that sounds like our home note as do, whether we're in G major or C major, or whether we're in A flat minor or D minor, whatever note the children recognize as being that home note, I personally believe that we need to call that do in terms of reinforcing. So yes.
Okay, the next one is, how exactly do you have students clap rhythm? Do you have some students clap a steady beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., and other students clap the rhythms of the song, or all clap one thing?
Usually we would have them all clapping one thing. And of course, when our probationers first come to us, one thing we have to distinguish is between beat and rhythm. So we will clap both beat and rhythm, but when we go to clap actual rhythms, we will more have individual students clap or have them all clap together. We like to use individual students just so we can constantly be checking on the skills of each chorister without having to give an exam or something like that. And then once we feel that they all kind of have it under their belt pretty well, then we'll clap it all, the rhythm all together while counting out loud. So a lot of times we will be counting the beat, but clapping the rhythm. It's not the only way you can do it, but that's how we tend to do it.
How do you manage this when you have the child for a maximum of 3 years and only 2 1/2-hour rehearsals a week?
Okay, so obviously where I have choristers everywhere from the 3rd grade to the 12th grade. So I assume this person is wanting to know what he or she can do in their own program in their parish. So would you tell me once again, what are the time constraints and years that they have them?
So maximum of 3 years, and then 2 1/2-hour rehearsals a week.
Okay. So the first thing I would have to say is if I'm only going to have choristers for 3 years and I only have 2 half-hour rehearsals, that is going to change what kind of repertoire I can sing in the setting. At that point, there are some simple polyphonic things that we could do. There are some simple chants that we can do, but I'm just going to have to recognize that it's going to be a more limited repertoire, which is okay. Not everybody needs to be singing a 5-part Palestrina offertory motet every Sunday. I guarantee you congregations will be far more moved if we choose something that is very simple, even if it's in unison, and do it well. I found that over and over again. Now, what can you do? So obviously, I think any kind of hymnody that, typical more traditional Catholic hymnody. Some of the modern stuff with the double dotted rhythms, that's very difficult to do. But that should be possible. And again, some simple motets, like the Gibbons Drop, Drop, Slow Tears. There shouldn't be any problem with that. How would I go about doing it? Again, that first year, you would be amazed, but as long as children can match pitch, by the end of the first year, they should be able to tackle whole notes, half notes, dotted half notes, quarter notes, and eighth notes just fine, and be able to clap and count those rhythms, even with only half an hour twice a week. That should be doable. They should also know at least major solfege, and perhaps in the second year, you could teach them the minor form of the scale. And I'm making an assumption that maybe this person has, say, third, fourth, and fifth grade. I don't know what grade it is, but let's assume that for right now. If we're going to do that, then what you'll want to do, knowing that your repertoire is going to be simple, go through your hymnal and pick out what are the hymns that use whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, and eighth notes, and are in primarily the major key, that aren't jumping all over the place. What are those hymns? All right, I find out what those are, I take them and use them. Then I need to find out a setting of the Mass Ordinary. You know, if you're going to do something in English, Owen Alstott's Heritage Mass, I mean, it's in a major key, it's fairly simple and straightforward. Or if you're going to use some chant, one of the easy chant masses, even though it gets overused, you know, the Mass 18 that we hear during Lent in many of the Novus Ordo parishes. That's something that should be doable. And then it's, again, you just, that first year, begin teaching those basics of your solfege, your rhythms. And I think the hardest part for people is that, especially if you're running a music program, people want to see results. And if you don't have the leisure time to take an entire year to teach that, you're going to have to take songs that the students already know and just work on making them beautiful without teaching the sight reading. And then also teaching new things using sight reading. And once you make the commitment to teach by sight, then you just have to keep at it through thick and thin. And eventually the choristers will get it. But again, even on half an hour, those notes should be fine to teach.
Next question is, how long is your probationer rehearsal time?
We have the probationers for a full hour twice a week. And 10 minutes of that is kind of a break time. So really 50 minutes. And then my assistant takes them for half the time, and I have them for half the time. So we each get them for about 25 minutes apiece. And my assistant is teaching the basics of sight reading, which is, up until this year, I didn't have an assistant, so I had to do that myself. But she works with them on for 25 minutes with sight reading, just the theory and everything, seeing it on the page. And then I take them for the second 25 minutes, and I take what they've learned with sight reading and begin applying it to simple music, but also I'm teaching all the vocal production and, you know, just the rudiments of singing beautifully and expressively is what we do.
Are intervals ever taught?
Yes, we do teach intervals. And again, we tend to teach those from known songs. So the first thing we do is, you know, once we've taught solfege up and down, let's say in the major key, then we'll kind of shelve solfege and take a song that everybody knows. You know, again, we say it's Jesus Christ is risen today, or Jesus Christ, or Hail Holy Queen, and we'll be singing through it. And you know, we'll start by giving the students do. All right, let's sing through it. And then at some point in the middle of it, we'll stop and where's do? They have to sing do. Once they get that, then we can begin teaching intervals. And again, you know, there are warm-ups that we'll use, so you can sing as a warm-up, major, minor, minor, major, and just go up the scale like that. teaching skips. And, once they learn how to skip over notes, then you can start going from do to fa, do to so. And we have either hymn, usually we do a lot of it from hymns that they already know, and begin pointing those things out. And then I will say we bribe our students with candy all the time. And, if you can, who can sing do to fa? And then, whoever can get it right the first time without being given that, all right, here's a piece of candy. So, there's this incentive that I really want to get this. There are times that for certain things, I don't do it so much now, but in the past, when students really get to where they can do everything with the solfege, all right, when you can make your way around the major scale and solfege everywhere, here's your king size Snickers bar, whatever it is, that type of thing that kids enjoy. But that's how we would teach the integrals as well.
Okay, the next question is, do you have any tips for finding and using the head voice? I have had some special challenges teaching that this year.
Mm-hmm. So some things that we use in no particular order. First of all, hooting like an owl, woo, woo, or making siren noises, woo, going up as high as you can into that head voice. And for some students, it's not going to happen immediately. I also sometimes will teach music in our school. And when I've done that, especially with kindergarten students, it's not necessarily successful the first time around, but if we start every rehearsal by doing that, usually 3 or 4 months in, they can sing in their head voice really well. Those are some first things. And then second of all, if we have older choristers who they learn how to sing in the head voice quickly using some of those methods, either hooting or trying to talk like Mickey Mouse. Hello, how are you doing today? Or I guess Mrs. Doubtfire, whoever that would be. And we might even have a rehearsal where everybody has to talk like that. And if you talk like that through the whole rehearsal, you get your piece of candy. So everybody's walking around, hello, how are you doing today? And that helps to access that. The second thing I would say, do a lot of warm-ups starting up high and going down low. So they have to start up in the head voice naturally. And then some other things, if you're singing a piece of music and it naturally goes down into the chest voice and kids are really pushing that, have them sing it pianissimo, because once you get soft, it's going to kind of make that barrel-chested chest voice go away. And that's one thing, especially with our newer students, we sometimes will not have them sing above a piano, maybe for the first 4 or 5 months until we know that they can stay in that head voice. And also when they're in the natural chest voice, not bark it out just until they've made that their own and they learn that this is how we sing when we're in choir.
Okay, we've had a few people ask, this is an age-old question. How would a parish be able to have a children's choir that sings for Mass weekly if children have busy schedules?
I will tell you how it happened at our parish briefly. I started what we call the Schola Cantorum. I put out some flyers. The first year, there were 12 children in it. It did not go well. Some of them couldn't even sing. You should not take everybody. And, that constant problem of we've got after-school activities. And, we had a few homeschool families join who this was kind of their music class. That helped to solidify things. We also had a few families from the school who were really supportive, and they felt that for their children's faith, this was something they needed to be in. And from that, we started to build somewhat of an expectation that, kids need to be here. It's something I still struggle with. I will say the assistant that I just hired, she is someone who is very much on top of being able to check who's at rehearsal, who's there on time. Is it an excused absence or a non-excused absence? And I've kind of let her have her way with that. And She emails parents on a daily basis, or on a weekly basis, I should say. These are the rehearsals. If you can't be there, or if you need to be late, you need to actually email me, not on the day, but before, and let me know that they're going to be late. And if your child misses a certain number of rehearsals, then that will change what they actually get to sing in Mass. Your child might be a senior chorister, but if they miss this number of rehearsals, then they're only going to get to sing the congregational music, because it would be unfair to those who were there to practice. And I was a little hesitant. I didn't know how that was going to go over. But I have to say, by putting in the same expectations that sports teams have, we have had a huge success this year of children either saying, you know what, I can't be in choir because of sports, or else to say, you know what, I'm going to make the commitment to choir, and I will be here, I will be on time, and I'll be here on Sunday. And if I can't, I know that there are some consequences to that. And that's been very helpful. So maybe what we need to do, and I'm not very good at this, but maybe what we need to do is just charitably say, you know, if you're going to be a part of this, these are the parameters. And maybe in the beginning, we're only going to have 5 students who show up. But if they learn it well, I guarantee you more children are going to want to join later on.
Okay, I guess this will be the last question for the day. We have others, so hopefully people can reach out to you after this if they would like follow up.
That'd be fine.
The last question will be, how do you navigate the pressure of learning repertoire, especially with only 1 rehearsal per week versus the desire or need to teach sight reading?
You know, it's one of those things that if you teach sight singing, it's heavier in the beginning, but it pays off in the end with much faster learning. I guess it's sort of like disciplining children. If you discipline them firmly when they're young, when they get older, you know, you can really enjoy them more, as opposed to be on their case at every moment. And sight reading is a lot like that, where in the beginning, it might be okay if you're starting your children's choir and you tell parents, we want to do what's best for them. So you have to understand that maybe for the first year, your students will come to Mass maybe only once a month. Maybe it takes us 1 entire month to learn 1 hymn and a responsorial psalm, something like, let's just say that's what it is. That's okay. Then they come to Mass and that's all they sing. But if parents are know that what their children are getting is valuable and worth it, they will be okay with that, as long as you let them know up front. And you can always have a cantor come in and sing the rest of those parts. And maybe students could even sit with their families and come up after communion to sing. I don't know. You know, I wouldn't do that. I would have them, you know, up in the choir loft from the beginning. But that's one way to approach it. And after a year, they will have, you know, at least a dozen hymns, some psalms, gospel acclamations, and probably just from going to Mass, they're going to have the Mass ordinary memorized. They'll know how to sing the Holy, Holy. And that might be one of the things that you just, since they already know it by rote, turn it into a beautiful way of singing it. And what will happen is that on Sunday, even though they're just singing the same thing the congregation sings, people will begin to hear that there's this beautiful treble line singing it. And they'll notice that these students are learning something and that it's a beautiful something. And, you know, after that first year, you'll have enough repertoire that you can do it for more than just 1 hymn and a psalm or something like that. And from there, you just keep building. And even if you only have a 3-year program, by the end of the 3 years, all of those students should be able to handle you know, the simplified music settings that you take, that they will sing in their parish. That's how I would do it.
Well, I wanted to thank all of our attendees today, as well as our presenter, Dr. Lucas Tappan, and American Federation Puri Cantores, and the program director, Kathleen, for organizing this. If you'd like to see what our future webinars are, you can go to ncea.org/webinars. And after today's webinar, I will email everyone with a link to the recording within 24 hours of the live webinar, as well as a survey. If you need a certificate of attendance for this webinar, you will get that after you fill out the survey. It will be emailed to you. Thanks again, and have a blessed day.